For 41 years the war ate the spiral arm the way rot eats a beam, from the inside, quietly, until whole worlds came down at a touch. It began, as those things do, over a shipping lane. It ended up over everything else. By the 15th year the Vascari ascendancy held the Coron Reach and the amber worlds beyond it. By the 28th it held the Thren cluster, and the Thren themselves were a memory kept in 3 museums and a song nobody sang in public. By the 34th year, the coalition of free suns had stopped calling its retreats retreats, and had started calling them consolidations, which is the word an alliance uses when it has run out of the other kind. And through all of it, Earth said nothing. Not nothing in the way a small nation says nothing, hiding behind its own irrelevance. Humanity was not small. It held the Sol system entire, and 4 colonies that had grown past their founding charters, and a merchant fleet that touched every port in the Reach, and a seat at the concord of species that it had been given 80 years earlier without ever asking for it. Humans were everywhere. Human freighters carried coalition grain. Human surgeons worked the border hospitals. Human engineers had rebuilt the water systems on 9 occupied worlds, and had done it, more than once, while ascendancy patrols watched from the ridgeline and decided it was not worth the ammunition. Humanity was present at the war, the way a mountain is present at a landslide. Every year on the anniversary of the first shot, the coalition brought a resolution before the conquered asking Earth to enter the war. Every year, Earth's delegation rose and gave the same answer, not a similar answer. The same one, word for word, read from the same page, in a voice that never rose. Earth will not send soldiers to your war. Earth will not send weapons to your war. Earth will send bread and medicine and hands, and we will send them to anyone who is hungry, wounded, or buried without asking whose flag they were born under. We ask of you one thing and only one, and we have asked it every year for 80 years, that the lantern be honored. That is all. That is the whole of it. Earth has nothing else to say. And every year, the coalition ambassadors would stand up and say what they thought of that, and they would not be gentle, and Earth's delegation would sit through it with their hands folded and their faces still, and then they would go home. The Keltian ambassador, whose homeworld had been glassed in the 12th year, called them the well-fed conscience of the galaxy. The Asuar delegate said humans had discovered a new kind of murder, which was to watch. A Thren survivor, one of the last, brought before the conquered in a chair that breathed for her, asked the human delegation, in a voice like paper tearing, what exactly they thought their bread was worth in a world where nobody was left to eat it. The human delegation did not answer. That was the rule. They had a rule about it. There was in those years a great deal of theorizing about why. The coalition's analysts wrote papers. Cowardice, said the simplest of them. Decadence, said the ones who liked long words. Some argued humanity was simply weak, that all that industry was merchant industry, that a species which had not fought a real war in 2 centuries had forgotten how, that the human fleet was a custom service with delusions. Others, quieter, noticed things that did not fit. The way human survey ships turned up in systems nobody had charted. The way the ascendancy, for all its appetite, had never once tested a human border. The fact that in 80 years of conquered membership, humanity had never asked another species for a single weapon, a single warship design, a single military patent, and had never sold one either. The ascendancy had its own theory, and its theory was the one that mattered, because the ascendancy was the one with the guns. High Marshal Ordo Vess had put it to his staff college in a lecture that was still required listening in the 4th Swords officer schools. Humanity, he said, was a species that had frightened itself. Somewhere in its history it had looked into a hole and never stopped seeing the bottom of it. And a species that is afraid of its own hands will fold them, and keep them folded, and call the folding a philosophy. There was nothing behind the human silence, Vess said, but a very old fear wearing a very good coat. He was not entirely wrong. That was the thing that made him so dangerous. He was not entirely wrong. He was only wrong about which way the fear pointed. Because humanity had, in fact, frightened itself. There was a century in the human record they did not put on their brochures, the Ash Century, they called it, though the name had been argued about for generations. It was the 100 years in which the species had come within a decision or two of ending itself, several times in several different ways, and had come out the other side with its hands shaking and roughly a third of its own history in ruins. Every human child learned it, not as triumph, as warning. They were made to memorize the numbers, and the numbers were not battles won. Out of that century came the thing the rest of the galaxy would never understand, until it was far too late. Humanity did not disarm. That was the part everyone got wrong. Humanity built. It built in the dark past Neptune, in the long cold where the sun is only the brightest of the stars, in an installation they called the sheaf and the rest of the galaxy did not know existed. It built for 200 years. It built with the patience of a people who had decided, in the wreckage of the Ash Century, that they would never again be helpless, and would never again be the reason someone else was, and who had discovered, to their horror, that those two vows do not sit easily in the same house. So they wrote a rule to make them sit. They called it the Covenant, and it was 4 sentences long, and every human alive knew it the way they knew their own name. We will build so that we are never helpless. We will not wield so that we are never the horror. The silence is not weakness. The silence is the weight we chose to carry. And it may be set down by nothing less than the whole voice of the species, on witnessed proof, and never for our own sake alone. 4 sentences, 200 years. A fleet in the dark that nobody had ever seen, growing, hull by hull, year by year, tended by people who understood that the honor of the work lay in never using it. And a lantern. The lantern was the other half, and it was the half that would matter. It was in itself a small thing, a beacon protocol, a broadcast standard, a squat white tower with a light in it that pulsed a pattern any receiver in the galaxy could read. Humanity had developed it in the 2nd century after the Ash, when they were rebuilding their own ruined places and needed a way to say, without language, without argument, without a treaty, there are no soldiers here. There are no guns here. There is nothing here but people who cannot fight you. When humanity joined the conquered, it brought the lantern with it. And then it did a thing that the galaxy's economists still could not fully digest 80 years later. It gave it away. Not licensed, not leased, not traded for concessions or seats or rights, given. The full specification, the receiver code, the tower schematics, the manufacturing tolerances, the maintenance manuals in every language the conquered could name, released into the common record on the day of accession, free forever, to every species and every faction and every pirate clan and every empire, including. The humans had been explicit about this, including any power that might one day be at war with humanity itself. The conquered had asked reasonably what Earth wanted for it. And Earth's answer had been that same sentence they would go on repeating for 80 years, that the lantern be honored, that where the white light burned, no hand be laid on those who could not fight. That was the price. That was the whole price. It was, everyone agreed, an absurd way to do business. And then, slowly, over decades, it became the one thing in the spiral arm that worked. Lanterns went up on hospital roofs and orphan houses and grain silos and refugee moons. The Kelshan put them on their evacuation ships. The Asuar, who fought each other constantly and viciously, put them on their birthing halls and then stopped bombing each other's birthing halls, which was, by Asuar standards, a golden age. Pirates in the Koran Reach honored the lantern mostly because pirates have mothers. Even the Ascendancy honored it for 39 years of the war, not out of love, but because it was efficient. A lantern was a place with nothing worth shooting. Shooting it cost you ordnance and bought you nothing but a grudge. That was the arrangement. That was the whole architecture of the thing. 500,000 lanterns burning across the spiral arm, and behind every one of them, unspoken, unadvertised, never once invoked, a species in the dark that had built 200 years' worth of something and had promised, in 4 sentences, not to use it. The galaxy thought the lantern was a gift. It was a gift, it was also a line. And humanity had drawn it so gently, so quietly, so long ago, that most of the powers in the conquered had forgotten there was chalk on the floor at all. Tamsin Reyes was 22 years old, and she had memorized the Covenant at 6, like everybody else, and she had understood it at 19, which was later than she liked to admit. She was a witness. 3rd class, which was the only class you could be at 22, which meant she carried a recorder, a med kit, a water reclaimer, and no weapon of any kind, and she was very tired of being asked why. The witness program was the oldest and strangest of humanity's contributions to the war it would not fight. The reasoning was in the 4th sentence of the Covenant. The silence could only be set down on witnessed proof, not reported proof, not intercepted proof, not the word of a coalition intelligence service with a war to win and every reason to lie. Witnessed. Human eyes on the ground, unarmed, transponder squawking, standing in the open where everyone could see them, recording what happened and swearing to it afterward with their name and their life. So humanity sent its young people into the worst places in the galaxy, gave them nothing to defend themselves with, and told them to watch. It was not, on paper, a sane institution. 211 witnesses had died in the 41 years of the war. Their names were read every year at the sheaf in the cold by people who did not weep in public. Every year the program was oversubscribed 9-1. Human beings are like that. It is one of the more inconvenient things about them. Tamsin had applied at 18, been rejected, applied at 20, been rejected, and been accepted at 21 on her 3rd try, because she was stubborn in a way the review board eventually decided to call resilient. She had grown up in the Karoo arcology, 3rd child of a hydrologist and a schoolteacher, and she had a habit, noted in her file, flagged as a concern, ultimately allowed to stand, of not being able to stop looking at a thing once it had gone wrong. Her first posting was a coalition field hospital on Den, and she watched a Kelsian surgeon work for 30 hours straight and then sit down in the corridor and put his face in his 4 hands, and she recorded it, because that was the job, and afterward he told her to get out of his hospital and she left without arguing, because that was also the job. Her second posting was the ration line at Coron Deep, where she watched an ascendancy quartermaster feed 9,000 conquered civilians because the alternative was disease, and she recorded that too and filed it. And when a coalition officer asked her to leave that part out, she said no, and there was a formal complaint, and it went nowhere, because the witness rules were the witness rules and both sides hated them equally, which the humans took as evidence that they were working. Her 3rd posting was Havarn. She got the assignment in a corridor on Coriol Station, standing under a departure board, reading it off her slate while a coalition destroyer crew shouldered past her, and one of them saw the white circle on her sleeve, the lantern mark, the witness sigil, and said something in Kelsian that her translator declined to render and spat on the deck at her feet and walked on. Tamsin looked at the wet spot on the deck for a second and a half. Then she looked back at her slate. Havarn, Sanctuary Moon, 3rd body of the Havarn Primary, Coalition registered, conquered, inspected, ascendancy acknowledged, 410,000 registered non-combatants of 9 species, 6 lantern towers, Class 1, full spectrum, maintained to human standard, refugee intake ongoing, no garrison, no orbital defense, no weapons on the surface above small arms class, and even those logged and locked in a conquered sealed armory that nobody had opened in 6 years. The safest place in the war, people called it, the largest sanctuary in the spiral arm, the place you sent your children if you had somewhere to send your children. Witness compliment, too. Koya Debyo first class 11 years in, Tamsin Ray's third class 7 months. She read it twice. Then she put the slate away and went to find her ship, and she did not think about the wet spot on the deck, or she told herself she did not, which for a person of 22 is nearly the same thing. Behind her and above her, and 11 billion kilometers past the last cold rock of her own home system, the sheaf turned in the dark, and the shipwrights went about their work, and the hulls stood in their cradles with their names stenciled on them, and nobody used them, and nobody had ever used them, and every human being alive had been raised to believe that this was not a failure but the entire point. The galaxy called it cowardice. The humans called it the silence, and they carried it the way you carry something heavy up a very long hill, and they had been carrying it for so long that they had almost forgotten how it would feel to set it down. Havarn was a gray moon with a green sea, and from orbit it looked like a stone with moss growing on it. The sanctuary had been a mining settlement once before the war, and the bones of that were still visible under everything else. The cut terraces, the empty pit heads, the long straight roads that went from nowhere to nowhere and had been built for ore trucks. The refugees had grown into it the way ivy grows into a ruin. There were tents in the pits. There were greenhouses on the terraces. There was a school in a decommissioned crusher house, and the children who went to it had, over 6 years, painted every square centimeter of its interior in colors that did not occur anywhere else in the Havarn system. And there were the towers. 6 of them spaced around the settled basin like the points of a rough crown, each 9 meters of white ceramic with a light at the top that turned slowly, pulsing a pattern that had not changed in 80 years. In daylight, you barely saw them. At night they made a soft white halo over the basin, and the halo was visible from orbit without instruments, and every ship that passed through the Havarn system, no matter whose flag it flew, read that pattern on its receivers and knew exactly what it meant. There are no soldiers here. Tamsin came down on a supply lighter with 40 tons of protein flour and a crate of school slates, and Koya Debyo met her at the pad with a cup of something hot and a piece of advice. "They'll hate you for about a week," he said. "Then they'll stop because you'll carry things." He was right on both counts. The hate was not personal, and it was not even really hate. It was the particular exhaustion of people who had lost everything to a war that a rich species was watching. Tamsin got it from the Kelshan farmers, who would not look at her. She got it from an Osuar woman in the medical line who asked her, through a translator, whether it was true that human children were taught the numbers of their own dead, and when Tamsin said yes, asked whether they were taught the numbers of anyone else's, and did not wait for an answer. And she got it, most of all, from the ones who had been on the sanctuary longest, who had lived under the lantern for 6 years, and had built an entire theory of the universe around it, and who therefore needed, in the way that people need, to despise the ones who had given it to them. Then, as Koya had promised, it stopped, because she carried things. She carried water pipe. She carried a Thren grandmother's medical chair up 206 steps to the terrace where the grandmother wanted to sit and see the sea. She carried, one long night in her 4th week, a Kelshan infant with a fever of 41 degrees down a mud road in the rain to a clinic, while its mother ran alongside her praying in a language Tamsin did not have and did not need. The infant lived. Its mother, whose name was Sithrako, brought her a bowl of soup the next week and set it down and did not say anything, and then said, "I still think you are cowards." "I know," Tamsin said. "Eat the soup." She ate the soup. It was very good. She recorded none of that because the recorder was for the war, and that had not been the war, and later she would think about that decision for a long time. The recorder was always running otherwise. That was the discipline of it. Every hour of every day, the little unit at her collar took in light and sound and metadata, and stamped it, and encrypted it, and burst it to the relay every 6 hours, and the relay sent it to a vault on Luna that nobody could open without a quorum of the whole species. That was the architecture. That was the paranoia built into it. No single human, no committee, no government could reach into the vault and forge a reason to break the silence. It took everybody. It had always taken everybody. She recorded the ration counts. She recorded the water quality. She recorded the arrival in her 5th month of a coalition supply convoy that unloaded 14 tons of grain and then, at the far end of the pad, quietly unloaded 9 crates that were not grain. Coy saw it the same time she did. They walked over together. The convoy's officer was a young Kelsian lieutenant who went the particular slate gray that Kelsian go when they are caught. "Medical," he said. Coy took the lid off the first crate. Inside, packed in foam, were the honeycombed cores of a coalition long-range munition, disassembled, unfused, en route to somewhere else. The silence on that landing pad lasted about 8 seconds, and Tamsin would remember it for the rest of her life, because it was the last completely simple moment she ever had. Right and wrong were on the pad in front of her in a crate, and she knew exactly which was which. "Take it back to the ship," Coy said. "It's transit only. It's not staying, it's—" "Take it back to the ship, Lieutenant. You'd have us leave it in open space, 500,000 rounds." "I would have you," Coy said, in a voice that was not raised and was not kind, "not put a weapon under a lantern. That is all I would have you do. It is the only thing anyone has ever asked you to do in 80 years, and it is not difficult, and you will do it now, and I will record that you did it, and that record will one day be the thing that saves your entire species. Take it back to the ship." The lieutenant took it back to the ship. Tamsin filed the recording that night, unedited, and it went into the vault on Luna with every other hour of her life, and she thought that would be the end of it. It was not the end of it. Somewhere in the Ascendancy's intelligence service, an analyst read a coalition supply manifest and made a note, and the note went up the chain, and a man read it who had been waiting years for exactly that kind of note. The Fourth Sword's flagship was called Inevitable, which tells you something about the Ascendancy's relationship with modesty. High Marshal Ordo Vess was 70 years old, which in Vascari terms was a hard, unpleasant middle age, and he had spent 41 years winning a war that his own logistics told him he could not finish. That was the thing that ate at him. The coalition would not break. Every year they were pushed back, and every year they were still there, thinner, meaner, better at bleeding him. His fleets were adequate. His yards were adequate. His war was not going to end in his lifetime. And Vess had a horror of unfinished work that his biographers later would trace to a childhood he never spoke about. He had a theory about why the war would not end, and the theory had crystallized over a decade, and it was, at its heart, a theory about light. "They rest under the lanterns," he told his staff, standing in the flag plot of the Inevitable with the Havarn system rendered in soft blue above the table. "You have all seen it, and none of you have said it, so I will say it. Every sanctuary in this arm is a rear area we cannot touch. They feed their armies out of them. They rotate their wounded through them. They stage their convoys past them, because they know the corridor around a lantern is a corridor we do not shoot into. There is a supply crate on Havarn that was under the white light 9 hours ago. 9 hours. It is in the record." "It was removed, Marshal," said a young officer at the end of the table, "by the human. The record also says that." The room turned toward him, which was, Ordo Vess would reflect later, the moment the whole thing might still have gone differently. His name was Ilsu Ren, Captain Adjutant, 29 years old, 3rd generation of a naval family, and he had made a career so far out of being just barely worth the trouble he caused. "It was removed," Vess agreed, "by a human, and what does that tell us, Captain Adjutant?" "That the protocol works, Marshal." "It tells us," Vess said, "that a species which will not lift a finger to end this war has appointed itself the referee of it. It tells us that our enemy's supply chain is being policed by the very people who refuse to fight, and that we are expected to be grateful. It tells us that there is a light which we have obeyed for 39 years, and that we have never once asked what would happen if we did not. The plot rotated. Havern came around, gray and green, the 6 lanterns picked out on it in white. 400,000, said the intelligence officer, not because anyone had asked, but because she wanted it in the record. Registered, 9 species, no garrison, confirmed by 3 sources. It is what it says it is, Marshal. It is a habit, Vess said. That is what it is. It is the habit that is losing us this war. And a habit is only a habit until it is tested. The order that came out of that room was called Directive Lantern Blind, and it was 2 pages long, and the second page is the one that would be read aloud, later, in a hall with the whole galaxy watching. The first page was almost reasonable. It observed that the Lantern Protocol had been abused. It noted, with citations, 4 incidents in 41 years, 3 of them minor, one of them the crate on Havern that a human had removed within the hour. It concluded that the Ascendancy could no longer regard the white light as a guarantee of anything. The second page was not reasonable at all. It ordered that lantern-marked sites within the theater of the Fourth Sword be reclassified as valid military objectives at the discretion of the local commander. It ordered that the Ascendancy's Electronic Warfare Corps begin transmitting the lantern pattern from its own hulls, its own depots. And this was the sentence. This was the one from decoy platforms placed in shipping lanes, for the purpose of drawing enemy relief and medical assets into engagement envelopes, the enemy having demonstrated that they will approach the white light without caution. They were going to use it as bait. That is the whole of it, stated plainly. They were going to take the one signal in the galaxy that meant here are the helpless, and they were going to broadcast it out of gun barrels, so that the ships that came to help would come without armor and without escort and without fear, because for 80 years the light had meant they did not need any. And then, having done that, having poisoned the well from which every wounded creature in the spiral arm drank, they were going to demonstrate the new policy on the largest sanctuary in the war, so that no one could mistake what it meant. The directive required 12 signatures. Ascendancy law was very particular about that. An order that reclassified a protected category required the sword's full command board, 12 names, each one written in the officer's own hand. It got 11. Ilsu Ren stood in the flag plot on the 9th day and did not pick up the stylus, and in the recording, because there is a recording, the Ascendancy recorded everything. That was their pride, and it would be their undoing. You can see him look at the document for 11 full seconds. Marshal, he said, if we do this, the light means nothing, not to them, to us. It will mean nothing to us. There will be a day when our own people are under it. Then our own people had better win, Vess said. Marshal, there are humans on that moon. There are humans everywhere, said Vess. Watching, recording, folding their hands, let them watch, let them record. Let them go home and tell their council of grandmothers what they saw, and let their council of grandmothers do what they have done for 80 years, which is nothing, at length, in a very fine voice. He held out the stylus. Sign, Captain Adjutant. No, Marshal. Vess considered him for a moment. He did not shout. That was the thing about Ordo Vess that everyone got wrong afterward. They wanted him to be a monster, and he was something worse, which was a competent man with a deadline. Noted, he said. Relieved, confined. Get out. The 12th signature was supplied by Ren's deputy, a man named Havik Saul, who signed it in 11 seconds without reading past the title, and who would, in a room full of the galaxy's ambassadors, be asked to explain that 11 seconds, and would find that he could not. 11 days later, the Fourth Sword came to Havern. Tamsin was on the number 3 tower when the alert went out, because a gull analog had built a nest in the housing again, and somebody had to get it out without hurting it. And she was up the ladder with a glove on her hand, and a bird in it when Koi's voice came over her earpiece, absolutely flat, in a way she had never heard it. "Tamsin, come down. Come down now and get to the recorder mast." She looked up. The sky over Havarn was doing something she had never seen a sky do. It was filling, not with cloud. The fourth sword translated in above the basin in a wave, hull after hull after hull, and they did not come in high and distant the way fleets did in the ident tapes. They came in low, deliberately low, close enough to see, close enough to make the greenhouses rattle, so that 410,000 people would stand in the mud and look up and see them. The 6 lanterns turned, and pulsed their pattern into the sky the way they had pulsed it every second of every day for 6 years. "There are no soldiers here. There are no soldiers here. There are no soldiers here." Tamsin came down the ladder so fast she took the skin off both palms. She let the bird go, and she did not see where it went, and afterward that was one of the things she could not stop thinking about. The way a mind will fasten on the smallest available thing when the largest one will not fit inside it. The Ascendancy's hail came over the open channel a minute later, unencrypted, on every frequency to everyone. It said, "This site is reclassified." There is a recording of the next 90 minutes. It is 411 minutes long, in total, across all the sources, and it has been played in full exactly twice in the history of the Conquered, and both times the hall was made to sit through all of it. What follows is not that recording, nothing is, but this is what it shows. It shows the 2 witnesses of Havarn walking out to the recorder mast in the center of the basin, which was the highest open ground in the settlement, and climbing the platform and standing. They wore no armor, because witnesses did not wear armor. They carried no weapons, because witnesses did not carry weapons. Koi Adebyo keyed the mast to broadcast on the Conquered open band, unencrypted, in clear, and the mast began transmitting the phrase it had been built to transmit, in every language in the common record, at a power that could be picked up in the next system. "Witness present, unarmed, no weapons on this body, 410,000 noncombatants. The lantern is lit." It repeated, it kept repeating. It was still repeating 90 minutes later, from a mast standing in a basin that no longer had a settlement in it. And that fact, that the mast survived, that it was still saying it, did more to the galaxy afterward than any speech ever did. The recording shows Tamsin raises hands. She had taken the skin off both palms on the ladder, and they were bleeding, and she gripped the rail of the platform and left 2 prints on it, and the prints are in the record, because the Ascendancy was not the only party that documented everything. It shows Koi Adebyo hailing the inevitable on the command channel, and speaking for 4 minutes and 19 seconds, without raising his voice, in the Ascendancy's own language, which he had learned in a hospital on Koran 11 years earlier from a dying enemy conscript who had wanted someone to talk to. He said there were no soldiers on Havarn. He said he had personally turned away a coalition munitions shipment 11 days ago, and that the record of it had been filed with the Conquered and was available to them at that moment, and he gave them the file index, and he read it out twice. He said there were 130,000 children on the moon. He said that he and his colleague were human witnesses, unarmed, and that they would remain standing at the mast in the open, for as long as the fourth sword remained in orbit, and that everything the fourth sword did would be recorded and transmitted, and that no force in the galaxy could stop that transmission, and that he was telling them this not as a threat but as a courtesy, so that they would know exactly what they were choosing. And then he said one more thing, and it was the last thing anyone on Havarn ever said to the Ascendancy, and the translation is disputed only in its punctuation. "You have 39 years of honoring this light. Nobody made you do that. You did it because some part of you knew it was the one thing in this war that was still clean. Marshal, you are about to find out what we are, and I am telling you, as a man who has watched your soldiers feed hungry people, that you do not want to know." The Ascendancy did not reply. Vess had left the channel by then. It is in his own log. He ordered the command channel closed at 11 minutes past, and the reason he entered in the log in his own hand, because he was a man who wrote things down, and that was the second half of his undoing, was 3 words long. Sentiment is contagious. The first strike took the eastern terraces, where the greenhouses were. The recording does not show what a body looks like when a kinetic round from orbit lands near it, and this account will not describe it either, because the witnesses did not describe it, and because there is a kind of telling that turns horror into spectacle and the humans afterward refuse to do that. The record is precise instead. Precision was the whole of their revenge, and it began that day. What the record shows is this. It shows the number 3 lantern tower going dark at 11 minutes past the hour. Not destroyed, dark. The Ascendancy shot the light out first, all 6 of them, in the opening salvo, because directive lantern blind required the marker to be extinguished before the sight was engaged, on the grounds that a lit lantern in a strike zone would confuse the record. It shows that this took 90 seconds, 6 towers, 90 seconds of the white light going out around the basin, one, and then another, while 400,000 people stood in the mud and watched it happen. That is the image. Of everything in 411 minutes of recording, that is the image that ended the war. Not the strike. The lights going out, deliberately, one by one, by a hand that knew exactly what it was doing and had signed 12 names to it. It shows the settlement being taken apart over the following 83 minutes, methodically, quadrant by quadrant, by a fleet that was in no hurry and under no threat. It shows Koi Adebyo standing at the mast the entire time. It shows him die at 61 minutes past, still transmitting. It shows Tamsin Rays carried off the platform by a Kelshan woman named Sithra Ko, who had brought her soup once, and who hauled her by the collar down into the old mine cistern under the Crusher house with 211 other people, most of them children from the painted school, and who put her hand over Tamsin's mouth and held it there while Tamsin screamed into it, and who did not let go for a long time. The cistern held. It had been cut into bedrock for a mining operation 80 years dead, and it held. 213 people came out of it, 31 hours later, into a basin where there was nothing left to come out to. Of the 410,000 registered non-combatants on Havarn, the Concord's final verified count was 386,409 dead. 11 of the dead were human, 2 were witnesses, the other 9 were relief workers, and one of them was a nurse who had been on the moon for 9 days. That number, 11, became important later, in a way that humanity spent a great deal of effort making sure it did not become. Because here is the thing that the Ascendancy assumed, and that the Coalition assumed, and that the entire Concord assumed in the days that followed, and every single one of them was wrong. They assumed it was the 11. They assumed that the sleeping thing had woken because someone had finally killed humans. It was the only model anyone had. It was how every other species in the galaxy worked, and it was how the Ascendancy worked most of all. You strike back for your own. They spent the following week bracing for a human reprisal that was about 11 dead humans, and they built their arguments around that. And Vess himself, in a staff meeting on the 4th day, said that 11 was a survivable number of humans, and there is no record of anyone in that room disagreeing. They were wrong. It was never the 11. Tamsin Rays, sitting in a medical bay on a Concord relief cutter 11 days later, with her hands wrapped and her voice mostly gone, said it to the Concord's Board of Inquiry in a sentence that would be carved, eventually, on a wall. "You keep asking me about our dead. Stop. Our dead are 11 out of 386,000, and if you make this about them, you will have understood nothing. They did not wake us by killing our people. They woke us by killing the thing we gave you. The lantern was ours to give, and it was yours to keep, and it was the only thing either of us ever did together, and they turned it into a lure. That is what they did. That is what this is about. They took the light that said, "Here are the ones who cannot fight you," and they put it on the front of a warship. Because that was the other half, and it came out on the 6th day. The Ascendancy had already begun implementing the rest of Lantern Blind. 3 decoy platforms, broadcasting the lantern pattern on a Class 1 signature, had been seated in the Koran shipping lanes 8 days before Havarn. 2 coalition hospital ships and 1 Ossuar evacuation barge had answered them, because for 80 years the white light had meant safe, had meant approach, had meant there are people here who need you. All 3 were destroyed on approach. 9,441 more. And on the 7th day, the Ascendancy Ministry of Information issued the statement that finished it. It said that the 4th Sword had engaged a coalition military staging site at Havarn. It said that the site had been fortified. It said, and the phrasing was chosen carefully, by people who were paid to choose phrasing carefully, and who had, it later emerged, argued about it for 6 hours. There were no lanterns at Havarn. They had shot the lights out first so that the record would be clean, and then they said the lights had never been there. That was the mistake, not the strike. The strike was an atrocity, and the galaxy had seen atrocities, and the galaxy had, God help it, learned to metabolize atrocities. The mistake was the sentence. The mistake was looking at a species that had spent 80 years building the most complete evidentiary record in the history of the conquered. A species that had put unarmed children in the path of armies for the sole purpose of being able to say we saw it. And here is what we saw, and telling that species that it had not seen what it had seen. There are 6 recordings of the towers going out, 3 from the witnesses, 1 from the mast, 1 from a coalition observation buoy at the system edge, and 1, the clearest of them all, from the Ascendancy's own targeting optics, which recorded everything, because the Ascendancy recorded everything, and which was in the vault within 9 days because a Vaskari lieutenant named Sova Ren, Ilsu Ren's sister, as it happened, which is a coincidence the historians have never quite gotten over, walked out of a listening post on Koran with a data core in her boot, and gave it to the first human she could find. The vault on Luna opened on the 19th day. It took 19 days because that is how long it takes to hold a vote of an entire species when the rule is that it must be the whole voice, and there are no proxies, and there is no quorum short of everybody, and the question on the ballot is not do you want war. The question on the ballot had been written 200 years earlier by people who had come out of the Ash Century with their hands shaking, and it read, "Has the line been crossed, in the plain sight of witnesses, in a manner that cannot be undone by any means but ours? And are you willing to be the one who answers?" 14,109,000,000 ballots, 11,840,000,000 yes. There was no cheering. This is the part that nobody who is not human has ever been able to hold in their head, and the humans have never been very good at explaining it, and they mostly stopped trying. The night the vote closed, the arcologies were quiet. On Luna they read the names of the Havarn dead, and they got through 4,000 of them before dawn, and they kept going the next day and the next. In the Karoo, where Tamsin Reyes' mother taught school, the parents came and took their children home early and did not tell them why, and then told them because human parents do. And 11 billion kilometers out, past the last cold rock, in the dark where the sun is only the brightest of the stars, the sheaf began to move. It did not look like an awakening. It looked like a shipyard that had been running every hour of every day for 200 years, because that is what it was. The sheaf had never slept. That was the thing the galaxy had never understood about the silence. The silence was not sleep. The silence was a hand held above a table, steady, for 200 years, by people who checked it every morning to make sure it was still steady. Now the hand came down. The cradles opened, the tethers dropped, and in the deep dark past Neptune, in a silence so total that the shipwrights on the gantries could hear their own hearts, 1,411 hulls lit their drives at the same moment. They had names. Every one of them had a name, stenciled on the bow in plain lettering, and the names were not victories. There was not a single victory among them. Humanity had spent 200 years building the most powerful fleet in the history of the spiral arm, and had named every ship in it after a place where human beings had once done to each other exactly what the Ascendancy had just done at Havarn. A fleet of ships named after crimes. That was the point. That had always been the point. Every officer who took a command took it with that name on the bow and had to say it every day in every log in every hail. This is what we are capable of. This is what happens when we stop holding the hand up. The galaxy's first sight of the human fleet came from a coalition picket at the edge of Sol, which recorded the translation and sent it out before anybody could stop it, and every species in the conquered watched it in the same 6 hours. They saw the drives light. They saw the formation build. They saw the numbers climb on the picket's own contact counter, past 400, past 900, past 1,000, past 1,200, and they saw the counter stop trying and simply print a figure. And then the human fleet did the thing that told the galaxy, before a single shot was fired, exactly what kind of thing had just woken up. It stopped. It formed up. It sat there at the edge of its own system, 1,411 ships, engines idling for 11 hours. And it sent a message ahead of itself, to every receiver in Ascendancy space, on every band in the clear on repeat, and the voice that read it was young and hoarse and steady. The Covenant said that the witness must speak. It had always said that. Nobody had ever had to read that clause aloud before, and when the Concord's lawyers finally did, on the 19th day, there was a long silence in the chamber, because the clause meant exactly what it said. If the silence is set down, it is not set down by admirals. It is set down by the ones who stood in the open and watched. They will speak, so that the species may hear, in the moment of its greatest power, the voice of someone who had no power at all. So they went to a medical bay on a Concord cutter, and they asked a 22-year-old with bandaged hands whether she would read the notice, and Tamsin Reyes said yes, and then asked to see it first, and then asked to change one line, and they let her. They let her, and the line she changed is the reason the Vascari people are still alive. The notice was 7 paragraphs long. It went out to every world, station, outpost, ship, and receiver in Ascendancy space, simultaneously at a signal strength that overrode local broadcast on 1,100 worlds, and it could not be jammed. And the Ascendancy tried for 6 hours and then stopped trying and simply let it play, because there was nothing else to do. It said, "This is Tamsin Reyes. I am a human witness, 3rd class. I was on Havarn. I am speaking for Earth, and Earth has decided to stop being silent, and this is the only warning you will get, so please listen to all of it. 41 days ago, the 4th Sword of the Ascendancy destroyed a lantern-marked sanctuary and killed 386,000 people who could not fight. They put the lights out first. Then they said the lights had never been there. Then they began broadcasting the lantern pattern from decoy platforms to lure medical ships into their guns, and they killed 9,000 more that way. We gave you the lantern. We gave it to everyone, including you, and we never asked for anything but that it be honored, and for 80 years you honored it, and now you have made it into a lure. If that stands, then there is nothing left in this galaxy that a hurt person can trust. We will not let that stand. That is why we are coming. It is not because 11 of our people died. 11 is nothing. 386,000 is not nothing, and neither is the light, and it is the light we are coming for. Here is what we are going to do, and here is what we are not. We are coming for the machine that did this. Your shipyards, your foundries, your munitions works, your fleets, your command citadels, your electronic warfare core, and every platform that has ever transmitted a false lantern. We will unmake all of it, and we will do it in one day, and there is nothing you can do to prevent that, and I am sorry, but that is simply the case. We are not coming for your people, not your cities, not your farms, not your hospitals, your schools, your children, your homes, or your grandmothers. Not one. If you are not part of the machine, nothing will happen to you, and we will feed you afterward, and you will find that we mean that, because we have been feeding people through this entire war, including yours. You have 40 hours. Every yard, foundry, and works in Ascendancy space is now a place you should not be. Take your families and go. We will not fire on anything leaving. We will not fire on anything carrying people. If your transports are inadequate, say so on this channel and we will bring ours. That is not a figure of speech. That offer is open for 40 hours and we will honor it, and you can watch us honor it. And there are 12 names. She read them. 12 names slowly, each one with its rank and its post, and after the 12th she added the correction she had asked for, the line she had made them change, and it was one sentence. Captain Adjutant Ilsu Ren refused to sign this order and is not on this list, and if any harm comes to him for that, we will know. Then she said, "That's all, please go." And the recording ends with the sound of her setting the slate down. The galaxy did not know what to do with the 40 hours. The coalition, which had been waiting 80 years for humanity to enter the war and had constructed an elaborate emotional architecture around that moment, discovered that it hated this. 40 hours warning. 40 hours to disperse fleets, harden targets, move munitions, arm everything. The Kelshan High Command sent a protest to Earth so heated that the translation software refused 2 of the verbs. Earth's reply was 4 lines long, and it was the first thing the human delegation had said outside the annual formula in 80 years, and it read, "We are not fighting your war. We are correcting one thing. The correction requires that no one who is not responsible be harmed. Warning them is not a tactical error. It is the entire point. If 40 hours is enough for them to stop us, then we do not deserve to succeed." And then, because someone at the Concord asked the question everyone was too proud to ask, Earth appended a 5th line. It is not enough. It would not be enough if it were 40 years. The Ascendancy spent the first 11 hours of the 40 trying to understand what was in orbit above it. Its analysts had a fleet to compare against, and the comparison did not work, and their failure to make it work is documented in a set of increasingly short memoranda that were later published in full, because the Vaskari Republic published everything afterward, as a kind of penance. The first memorandum was 9 pages long and assessed the human fleet as a strategic threat, requiring the concentration of the 2nd and 5th swords. The second was 4 pages, and noted that the human hulls did not appear to carry conventional armament in the expected ratios, and that this was either a catastrophic design flaw or something the analyst declined to speculate about in writing. The third was 1 page. It observed that a single human vessel, the 4th in the 2nd line, designated by the Ascendancy as Contact 41, and bearing on its bow the name of a valley on Earth, where, 600 years earlier, human beings had done something to other human beings that they had never found a way to explain, had a power signature that the Ascendancy's instruments could not resolve, because the instruments had not been built with enough digits. The 4th memorandum was 1 sentence, and it was written by the head of the Ascendancy's Naval Intelligence Directorate at Hour 9, and it read, "We have been at war for 41 years with people who were letting us." She resigned at Hour 10. She was one of the 40,000 who volunteered to read names at Coriol. The Ascendancy tried in those 40 hours to do the things that empires do. It tried to jam the notice and could not. It tried to disperse its fleets and found that its fleets were in dock, because a war machine that has been winning for 41 years is a war machine that is always in refit somewhere, and the humans had chosen their hour with a patience that was, in retrospect, obscene. It tried to take hostages. There were 411 human relief workers in Ascendancy space, and the Ministry of Security drafted an order to detain them, and it was never issued, and the man who declined to issue it wrote on the bottom of the draft, in his own hand, a single word which is now the most famous marginal note in Vascari history. The word was why. Not why detain them, he knew why. He meant the other why, the one that had been sitting in every Vascari chest since the notice ran, and it was this: if a species can hold a fleet like that in the dark for 200 years and not use it, if it can watch a war eat the arm of the galaxy for 4 decades and keep its hands folded, then what exactly does anyone imagine 411 hostages are going to accomplish? There was nothing to bargain with. That was what broke them in the end, not the fleet. The Ascendancy had been prepared in some deep institutional way for a fleet. What it was not prepared for was a power that wanted nothing. They had spent 41 years in a war of appetites, where every actor could be understood by what it wished to take, and now there was a thing in their sky that had no appetite at all, that had refused territory before it was offered, refused reparations before they were mentioned, and had asked for one impossible-sounding item, 12 names and a light. And the galaxy watched. That is the other thing about the 40 hours. Every species in the Conquered watched them live in their own homes on the open bands because the humans transmitted everything. Every hail, every scan, every transport lift, every hour of the fleet sitting there with its guns cold. They opened their own operational feed to the entire spiral arm and did not curate it, and their fleet command later explained that decision in a single line of testimony that made the Kelsian ambassador put his 4 hands over his face. "We wanted witnesses," the admiral said. "We have always wanted witnesses. That's the whole point of us." So the galaxy watched a species it had called cowardly for 80 years hold the largest fleet ever assembled motionless over an enemy's shipyards, and use its first day of war to run a ferry service. The Asuar have a word for what the galaxy felt in those 40 hours, and it does not translate, and the closest anyone has come is a phrase from an old Asuar funeral text: the fear that arrives after the danger has passed, when you finally understand what was standing behind you. Because they all did the arithmetic. Every ambassador, every admiral, every planetary council in the spiral arm sat down in those 40 hours and did the same sum, and the sum was this: 1,400 hulls, 200 years. 80 years of Conquered membership, during which humanity had been insulted in open session, blockaded twice by coalition trade authorities, boycotted, lectured, spat at in corridors, called cowards to its face by species whose hospitals it was rebuilding at its own expense. And it had never once, not for a single hour, taken that fleet out of the dark. They had assumed the human silence was empty because the alternative had been unthinkable. The alternative was that the silence was full, that it had always been full, and that a species with the power to end any war in the galaxy in a single day had chosen, every morning for 200 years, to get up and not do it, and had let itself be despised for that choice, and had gone on feeding people anyway. That is not a comfortable thing to learn about your neighbors. It is, in fact, the most uncomfortable thing in the Conquered's history, and there are species in the spiral arm who have still not entirely recovered from it, and who conduct themselves rather differently now, in ways they do not discuss. The 40 hours are, in some ways, the most extraordinary part of the whole account, and every species tells it differently. The Ascendancy tells it as the days the sky filled with ghosts, because the human fleet took up station over the yards and simply held there, over Vaskar Prime, over the great works at Talon, over the 52 shipyards of the Ascendancy's spine, 1,411 hulls with the names of crimes on their bows, guns cold, doing nothing. The dockworkers tell it differently, because the dockworkers were the ones who came out. 9,300,000 people worked the Ascendancy yards. They had families in the yard towns, in company housing built up against the gantries, because that is how empires build. When the notice ran, the Ascendancy Ministry told them it was a bluff and to report for shift. Some of them did. Then at hour 11, an old woman in the Talon works, a welder, 41 years on the gantries, a woman whose name nobody knows because she never gave it, walked out of the north gate with her grandchildren and stood in the road and looked up at the sky, and someone filmed her doing it, and the film went everywhere. By hour 16, the yard towns were emptying. By hour 22, the roads were solid. And at hour 24, the Ascendancy Transport Authority, which had not been designed for this, collapsed, and there were 200,000 people on a highway outside the Talon works with nowhere to go and no way to get there. So the humans came down. 1,100 lighters, unarmed, unescorted, with their bays open, landing on a highway in enemy territory in the middle of the largest military operation in galactic history, to give a lift to the people who built the ships they had come to destroy. There is film of that too. There is a great deal of film of that. There is one sequence, 11 seconds long, that has been shown so many times in so many places that it has become a kind of galactic shorthand. A human loadmaster, maybe 25, kneeling on the ramp of a lighter, holding out both hands to a Vaskari boy of about 6, who will not come. The Ascendancy did not send the 12. For 9 days it did nothing at all, because there was nothing left of it that could do anything, and because the machinery of a 900-year-old empire does not know how to move when the thing that moved it has been taken away. The Ascendant himself, Saren Vaskar VI, made 3 broadcasts in those 9 days. In the first he promised victory. In the second he promised endurance. In the third, which lasted 40 seconds and was not scripted, he asked his people what they wanted him to do, and that was the end of him, though it took another month to become official. On the 10th day, the 12 were sent. They were not sent by the Ascendant. They were sent by the yard workers of Talon, who had walked out of the north gate with their grandchildren, and who came back to a gray, slumped ruin where their work had been, and who then did the arithmetic that the humans had very carefully declined to do for them. The humans had not told them who to blame. That was the thing. Every atom of the human operation had been designed to make it impossible for the Ascendancy's people to blame anyone but the 12, the warning, the transports, the loadmaster's open hands, the 81 dead humans who had not fired back, the 149 names published before anyone asked. When a Vaskari mother looked for someone to hate, the humans had left exactly one door open, and they had put a light over it, and they had walked away. The 12 were arrested by their own people. 11 of them anyway. High Marshal Ordo Vess was found in the flag plot of the Inevitable, which was still in dock at Vaskar Prime, slumped and gray and half unmade around him, and he was sitting in his chair with his logs open and his sidearm on the table in front of him, and he had not used it, and he was still there when the boarding party came. He had asked for one condition, transmitted in the clear, and the conquered had argued about it for a day, and the humans had said yes in 90 seconds. He wanted to speak to the witness. They met in a compartment of a conquered cutter with a table between them and a Kelsian observer in the corner and the recorders running, because the recorders were always running, and that was the whole point, and Ordo Vess knew it, and he had chosen it. He was 70 years old and he looked it. She was 23 by then. Her birthday had passed during the 40 hours, unremarked in a corridor. He looked at her for a long time. He had expected, he said later, to be executed. He had planned for it. He had a speech. "You are the one who read the notice," he said. "Yes." Why you? Because our law says the witness speaks. Tamsin's voice was still not right. It never fully came back. So that when we are at our strongest, the one who talks is the one who was weakest. It's supposed to keep us honest. I don't know if it works. Vess absorbed that. I studied your species for 30 years, he said. I told my staff college that you were a people who had frightened yourselves and folded your hands. I was told this morning the number of ships in your fleet. I was told the number of years you have been building them. 1,400 hulls, 200 years. He set his hands flat on the table. You could have done this in the 5th year of the war. You could have done it in the 1st. Why did you not? Because you hadn't crossed the line. 94 worlds, said Vess. 41 years. The Thren are gone. The Kelshan lost a homeworld. You watched all of it and did nothing, and then you did all of this in one day over a light. Yes, said Tamsin. Explain it to me. I am asking you sincerely. I am not being clever. I have 4 hours before they take me to Coriol, and I have nothing left to be clever with. Explain to me why 386,000 at Havarn woke you and 94 worlds did not. Tamsin was quiet for a while. She had been asked the question by 4 inquiries and 11 journalists, and it had made her angry every time, and it did not make her angry now. And she thought afterward that this was because he was the first person who had asked it, as though he genuinely could not see the answer. And she understood, sitting across from him, that he genuinely could not, and that this was the most frightening thing about him. Because your war was yours, she said at last. It was a horror, and it was yours. You made it and you fed it, and the coalition fed it back. And every time we were asked to pick a side, all we could see was that a side is a thing that grows. We know what we are. We built a fleet for 200 years because we're afraid of what happens to us if we're ever helpless again, and we didn't use it for 200 years because we're more afraid of what happens to us if we're ever certain. If we had come in at year 5, we would still be in it now. We would be in it forever. We would have become the thing we built the fleet to stop being. That is not cowardice, Marshal, whatever your staff college says. It costs more than you can imagine, and we paid it every single year. And we sat there and let them spit on us, and we went home. She leaned forward. But the lantern wasn't a side. That's what you never understood. The lantern was the one thing in this whole galaxy that didn't belong to anybody. We gave it away, to you too, to you especially. We gave it to you for free, and you used it for 39 years, and it worked. Your soldiers ate under it. Your wounded slept under it. It was the only thing left in the spiral arm that everybody kept, and we kept it standing quietly for 80 years, by being the people who could break anything and never did. And you turned it into bait. Vess said nothing. You put the light that means, here are the ones who cannot fight, on the front of a decoy platform so that hospital ships would come to it, she said. Do you understand what that does? Not to us. Forget us. In 100 years, on some moon nobody has named yet, there will be a child under a white light, and she will look up at a ship coming in, and she will not know if it is help or not. Forever. That is what you made. That is what we came to take back. And so you unmade my life's work, said Vess, over a symbol. No, said Tamsin. We unmade your life's work over a promise. The symbol is just where we wrote it down. He was quiet for a long moment, and then he asked the question he had actually come to ask, and his voice was not steady. What are you going to do to me? And Tamsin Reyes, who had watched a man she loved die at a transmitter mast, while he was still saying the word unarmed, and who had been held down in a cistern with a hand over her mouth for 31 hours while a moon came apart above her, and who had, sitting in that room, the entire weight of humanity's fleet at her back and the moral authority of the whole galaxy in her hands, looked at the man who had done it and gave the answer that every human child now learns before they learn the covenant. Nothing, she said. I'm not going to do anything to you. That's not what we're for. We're going to take you to Coriol and put you in a room in front of every species you ever hurt, and we are going to read your own order out loud, the one you signed in your own handwriting, and then we're going to read the names. All of them. Every one of the 386,000 and the 9,441 from the lanes, and the 81 of ours who wouldn't shoot back, and the 149 of yours that we killed, because they count too and we will say so. And you're going to sit there and listen to it. That's all. That is the entire punishment. Nobody is going to touch you. She stood up. I've buried the only people I had, she said. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm going to make you say the word lantern out loud in front of everyone, and then I'm going to go home. In the weeks between the unmaking and the trial, the coalition of free sons discovered that it had been fighting a war for 41 years and had no idea what to do with the end of one. Its fleets moved. Of course they moved. There were 94 occupied worlds and no ascendancy navy left to hold them, and there were 4 decades of grief with nowhere to go, and the coalition's forward commands began drawing up plans that had the words final and settlement in their titles. The Kelsian High Command requested, formally, in writing, through the Concord, that the human fleet remain on station over Vaskar Prime for 90 days while coalition forces concluded the security situation in the Ascendancy Corps. Earth's reply took 2 hours to compose and was 6 words long. No, and we will be watching. The coalition's second request, drafted more carefully, asked whether Earth might at least consider the strategic wisdom of permitting the dismantlement of Vaskari industrial capacity in general, given that any industry could be converted to war production in a generation. Earth's reply to that one was longer, and it was read out in open session, and it is taught in schools now, on 1,100 worlds including Vaskari ones. You are asking us to help you starve 1,100 worlds slowly because a fast starvation would be visible. We have done that. Not to you, to ourselves. In a century we do not enjoy discussing, and we will not do it again, and we will not stand aside while it is done in the name of the light we just spent a fleet defending. Understand our position exactly. The machine that broke the lantern is gone. Nothing else is going to be taken from these people. If a coalition ship fires on a Vaskari city, a Vaskari farm, a Vaskari grain train, or a Vaskari child, it will find us in the way, and we will not fire on you either, and you will have to explain to your own people why your rounds are landing on the hulls of the species that unmade your enemy for free. We are not on your side. We were never on your side. We were on the side of the light, and you were, most of the time, standing near it, and that was the entire extent of our agreement, and it has now been honored, and we are going home. They did not go home immediately. For 9 months the human fleet stayed in ascendancy space, and it did not fire another shot, and what it did instead is the reason that 900 Vaskari volunteered to read the names of the Havarn dead at Coriol. 9,300,000 yard workers had no work. The company towns had been built against the gantries, and the gantries were gray, slumped ruin, and the Ascendancy's food distribution had been run through the same military logistics corps that no longer existed. The Vaskari winter on the northern continents is a serious thing. The first estimates from the Concord's Relief Board projected 2 million dead of cold and hunger before spring, and the Relief Board had no ships, because every relief ship in the spiral arm had spent 41 years being shot at, and there were not many left. Earth had 1,411 hulls in orbit with nothing left to do. They stripped them. That is what they did. They took the most powerful warships ever built and they pulled the ordnance out of them and turned the magazine spaces into grain holds in orbit in 11 days. And then they ran a food bridge from Sol to Vaskar Prime for 290 days. The ships still had the names of crimes on their bows. Vaskari children in the yard towns learned to recognize the hulls by their silhouettes on the approach, the way children anywhere learn to recognize the truck that brings the thing they need, and the human crews taught them the names, and told them when they were asked what the names meant, and did not soften it. There is a photograph. It is on a wall at Coriol now, of a human loadmaster sitting on a ramp in the snow outside Talon, eating out of a ration tin, with 3 Vaskari children sitting on the ramp beside him doing the same, and behind them, in plain lettering 9 meters tall, the name of a valley on Earth where human beings once did something they have never found a way to explain. That photograph did more to end the ascendancy than the fleet did. Everyone understands this now. The ascendant abdicated in the 4th month of that winter, and he did it because the yard towns had stopped listening to him, and the yard towns had stopped listening to him because they were being fed by the enemy he had told them was a coward. Tamsin Reyes was not on the food bridge. She had asked to be and had been refused gently on medical grounds, and had then been refused again, less gently when she pushed. She spent those months on a Concord cutter, and then on Coriol, doing the only work anyone would give her, which was the deposition. 411 hours of it. Every inquiry in the Concord wanted her, and she gave them all the same thing, in the same flat, ruined voice, and she never once cried on the record, and afterward she told a friend that this was not strength, and that they should stop calling it that. She wrote to the 213. That was what she did with her nights. Everyone who had come out of the cistern, she found them, one at a time, through 9 relief agencies and 4 species registries, and she wrote to each of them by hand and asked how they were and what they needed and whether anyone was helping. Cithrico wrote back first. Her letter is not in any archive. Tamsin never released it and never will. What is known is that it was 2 lines long, and that she carried it, folded, in the breast pocket of her coat for the rest of her life, and that on the day she stood up at Coriol to read the first 4,000 names, an usher saw her touch that pocket once before she began. The trial at Coriol lasted 11 days, and 8 of those days were the names. The Concord sat for all of it. That was the condition, and the humans had been immovable on it. The assembly would not adjourn, would not rotate, would not take the reading in shifts. Every ambassador of every species sat in that hall for 8 days, while the names of the Havarn dead were read into the record, and they were read by volunteers, and there were 40,000 volunteers, and they came from every species in the Concord, including 900 Vaskari. Tamsin read for 4 hours on the first day and 4 hours on the last, and in between she sat in the gallery next to Cithrico, who had brought her soup once and had held a hand over her mouth for 31 hours, and neither of them said very much. The 12 were tried and convicted. 9 of them are still alive today, in a facility on a cold world where they garden. Havik Saul, who had signed in 11 seconds without reading past the title, was asked on the 6th day to explain those 11 seconds, and stood in the box for a full minute and then said, "I don't know," and sat down. And that answer has been studied by more ethicists than any speech in Concord history. Ordo Vest spoke once. He was asked whether he had known there were no soldiers on Havarn. Yes, he said. He was asked why he had ordered the lanterns extinguished before the strike. So that the record would be clean, he said. He was asked whether he understood now what he had done. And the recording shows a 70-year-old man standing in a box in a room with 9,000 people in it, and it shows him open his mouth twice, and it shows him fail, and it shows him sit down without ever having said the word. Ilsu Ren testified for 6 hours. He is, at the time of this account, the 3rd-ranking officer of the Vaskari Republic's Disaster Relief Service, and every year he goes to Havarn. Humanity took nothing. That is the part the coalition never forgave, and it is the part the historians still argue about, and it is the part that the humans themselves regard as so obvious that they have never bothered to defend it. They were offered the Ascendancy's occupied territories, and they declined, and returned them to the species they had been taken from, and did not stay to administer the handover. They were offered a permanent seat on the Concord Security Board, and they declined it and the Keltian ambassador who had, 16 years earlier, called them the well-fed conscience of the galaxy, asked them why in open session, and the human delegate said, "Because in 50 years there will be a generation of us who did not carry the silence, and they will look at that seat and they will think it is theirs by right. No, take it away from us, please." They were offered reparations and declined. They asked for one thing. They asked that the lantern be rebuilt, every tower that had gone dark, every decoy platform accounted for and destroyed, and its coordinates published. And they asked that the protocol be amended in the common record with a single additional line, proposed by a 23-year-old witness third class and adopted by the conquered without a dissenting vote, which had never happened before and has not happened since. The line reads, "The light is not a courtesy, it is a border. It is the last one and it belongs to no one and it is kept by everyone." Then the fleet went home. 1,411 hulls, with the names of crimes on their bows, turned around and went back out past the last cold rock, and the cradles closed over them, and the tethers went back on, and the shipwrights went back to work, and the sheaf kept building, because the first sentence of the covenant has never been repealed and never will be. The hand went back up above the table. It is still there. It is checked every morning. And humanity went quiet again. Not the same quiet. That is the thing everyone notices now when they deal with humans. The old silence had been read for 80 years as absence, as a species that was not really there, that had nothing behind it, that could be spat at in a corridor on a station with no consequence at all. Nobody reads it that way anymore. Now, when a human delegation folds its hands and says nothing, the room goes still, and every ambassador in it understands precisely what is being held, and how long it has been held, and by whom, and at what cost. They stayed out of the war for 41 years. They came in for one day, and when they left the galaxy with exactly one instruction, which was the same instruction they had been giving, in the same words, every single year for 80 years, and which not one power in the spiral arm had ever bothered to actually hear, until the fourth sword shot 6 lights out of a sky over a moon full of children. Honor the lantern, that's all, that's the whole of it. Tamsin Reyes went back to Havarn. She was 24. She had been offered a commission, a seat, an appointment, a book contract, a statue, and a permanent posting anywhere in the spiral arm she wanted, and she had said no to all of it in a single letter that was 2 lines long, and she had gone back to the basin with a work crew and a container of white ceramic panels. They rebuilt the number 3 tower first, because it was the one she had climbed on the last morning, with a bird in her hand. It took 11 weeks. The children from the painted school, the ones who had come out of the cistern, 213 of them, who were older now and who did not talk about it much, painted the base of it, because it turned out that this was what they did with anything that stood still long enough. On the evening they finished, 4,000 people came out into the basin, from the new tents and the new greenhouses and the rebuilt terraces of 9 species, and a few of them were Vascari, which nobody remarked on, because by then nobody did. Cithrico stood with her hand on Tamsin's shoulder. There was no speech. There had been enough speeches. The galaxy had drowned in them for a year, and the humans had refused most of them, and there would not be one here. Tamsin Reyes climbed 9 meters of white ceramic with a lantern head under one arm, exactly as she had climbed it on a morning when a sky had filled with ships, and she seated it, and she made the connection, and she came back down and stood in the mud with everybody else and looked up. The light came on. It turned slowly, the way it had turned for 80 years, pulsing its pattern into the dark where anyone in the system could read it, where anyone with a receiver on any hull, under any flag, in any war that anyone might ever think to start, could read it and know exactly what it meant. And know, now, in a way they had not known before, exactly what stood behind it, silent, out past the last cold rock, with its hand held steady above the table. There are no soldiers here.